now to something, I have a final section of the talk just talking about a little bit mixed things about graphics and graphics options and performance. So here's the list of, well, if you played the beta, you probably saw similar stuff here, although in the beta, not all of the graphics options worked. They were kind of a little bit broken. We've fixed that up now for the final release. The beta was primarily intended for testing the backend and the multiplayer and the core gameplay and things like that. In overall, our graphics options are, we have 4 major categories of the low quality, the medium, high, and ultra. So this is sort of to give people an idea of how we intended these options to be used. Low is really the, well, of course, it's the absolute lowest possible in our graphics, but as we have a multiplayer game, we can't scale it down and make it look too bad. Well, we can make it look, it has to look respectable in general, because we can't make a game that looks just absolute shit on the lowest quality levels. People that have some kind of graphics card still want to be able to play it and have a good experience, of course. But even more importantly, in a multiplayer game, you can't just disable everything. You can't just, because that increases the visibility too much. If you disable all our particles and disable all our shadows, it becomes like Quake 3 Arena. And that might be fun in itself, but it's not really fair to play a multiplayer game with the type of visual style that we have. So we have a pretty high min spec in general for the game of a 8800 GT card that's sort of designed for this low detail. You might not have the best absolute experience, of course, but the game will run, and it won't be too unfair in multiplayer. That's the idea, at least. Then we have the medium setting. There we actually enable a lot of the graphics options that we have. But not all of them. We use the SSA or the cheaper stuff, and this is sort of intended for mid-range DX10 cards that are quite a bit better than the 8800, but not as good as the new modern DX11 cards. But you can still get a pretty good visual quality. But then we also have the high graphics mode, and that's really what gaming is designed for. It's designed for people to use that because you get good frame rate from it. But it's always a personal preference. Do you want 60 FPS and or well, even higher FPS, or do you want a little bit lower FPS but even higher quality? So it's difficult to say exactly what's the best choice for you, but for hardcore gamers, well, it's usually 60 FPS or nothing. But medium runs well and high runs really well on a 560 Ti, or, well, a GeForce 580 will run high really well at 60 plus FPS. And it has everything enabled, the high mode, except that some of them are not at the absolute highest detail settings for it. So that's what we have the Ultra for, where we sort of crank things up further. Where the shadows are a little bit higher, a little bit sharper, and the terrain is a little bit more tessellated. And also we have the big setting that we have in Ultra is that our NTL thing. We use our multi-sampling there, which is really, really memory consuming and really performance consuming in general, but it looks better, but it doesn't look giant. It's not a giant step in visual quality, but it still looks good. So if you have a multi-GPU machine, like the ones we're playing here, like a dual 580 or a dual 560 for that matter also, Ultra, you can run that at 60 FPS then. And that's usually the way we demo the game also. So I did mention anti-aliasing, and that's something we've been spending quite a lot of time on, because anti-aliasing is sort of, both from a visual point of view, it's annoying. It's something that flickers on the screen, you see pixels moving around, and it's not very pleasant to look at such a picture, but it's also annoying from a gameplay point of view because it distracts the eyes, your eyes. You sort of find these small crawlies. You get pretty used to it, though. Many games have a lot of aliasing. But we've tried to spend quite a lot of time on this, and it's especially difficult with deferred shading because then you can't use the traditional multi-sampling, the traditional MSA modes where you just do forward rendering and render with 8x MSA or something like that. We have to spend a lot more special care to do it with deferred shading because this G-buffer I talked about, that has to be rendered out with much higher resolution then. So we have multiple options here. We have yeah, you saw them in the graphics optionals. We have anti-aliasing deferred, as we call it, which is the MSA approach of using 2x or 4x anti-aliasing. It's really 4x is really running the game in double the width and double the height, pretty much, but with some clever optimizations on top of that. Or we have the post-processing anti-aliasing approaches also, which is we use FXAA, which is a technique NVIDIA, Timothy Lottis at NVIDIA developed. We have multiple quality settings also. That is rendered at the ordinary resolution, and then it's a simple, well, not as simple, it's actually a pretty complex post-processing effect, but it's being added afterwards to try and fix up the picture. But once we added all these options, we also found that it makes a lot of sense actually to support both of these at the same time for the ultimate quality, and that's what we use for Ultra also. We combine both of these because MSA is really good at finding fixing aliasing due to geometry detail being well, small type of geometry details or foliage or that type of thing. But it's not that good at fixing edges because it's not done in HDR, that MSA. It's done in an earlier stage, so it's not as good at fixing aliasing on very bright edges and things like that. So, but on the other hand, the post-processing anti-aliasing solution we have, that runs after the final picture has been rendered. So it runs in a different gamma space, and it finds those edges and smoothes them out. But in itself, the FXA is not that good at fixing aliasing due to thin geometry and stuff like that. So it's the combination of both makes it really good. But these are both completely optional features, but we think it improves the quality quite significantly. And yeah, I was talking about MSA, and here's one of the optimizations we have for MSA is that we will be just brute forcing and running the entire scene super sampled and evaluating lighting 4 times for every pixel. That's extremely expensive. And extremely wasteful also because you don't get that much out of it. So what we do instead is that we do selective super sampling for our lighting when we're using the MSA mode. So we detect the edges that we actually have in the screen and only super sample those. So that significantly improves the performance of the effect. But it's still a heavy effect, big hit there. We're talking quite a bit about performance in the game, and typically when running games, when you guys run games, there's not really that many tools for tracking performance. You can run fraps and get a small FPS counter, or you can run, I don't know. There's a couple of tools that show the GPU load and stuff like that, but they're not really that good or that detailed. And especially CPU performance and performance over time is a little bit difficult to track. So we've added a couple of things in the engine to make it a little bit easier for hardcore gamers. First of all, we've added back a console, classic PC console, where we have a whole bunch of console commands that can be activated. Woohoo! If I knew that was the feature that would get the most applause, we probably could have implemented that first and skipped all of the lighting stuff, and that was a lot more time to work on. So that's cool. We don't have a huge amounts of console commands, but I think we can. Well, actually, the engine has huge amounts of console commands. We have around 3,000 commands, but we don't expose all of them. We expose just a select few. Well, I'm not sure if 100 of them or something, because you can't use the visualization modes that I was using here to take screenshots, because someone will play and only show normal maps or something. That would be a bit unfair, I would say. I hope you agree also. And we also have a frap-style FPS meter that's very simple, just showing up screen with the activated console command. And we also have this, which I haven't seen in any. This is part of our development tools. We have even more advanced tools also, but this is a very cool thing that we usually play the game with all the time. It shows a graph, a yellow and a green graph. And the yellow graph is the CPU performance over each frame. Every pixel here, this is animating lines, every pixel is a frame. And the green is a GPU performance graph. So it counts in milliseconds. And you can see spikes here in performance, although it can be difficult to track down exactly what that spike is. But you can at least see if you have super stable performance, or if you have some major problem, or things like that. And ideally talk about it more on forums or report it to us and things like that. So I think that can be quite helpful. And here's a zoom in on that. So we have the middle line is sort of when you have 30 FPS, and the line, a little bit further down is 60 FPS. And here we see here I got a couple of big spikes. I think the 2 earlier ones was when I took a screenshot myself, because then it takes quite some time to actually take a screenshot. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. And then the final thing I want to mention is our stereo rendering. Some of you guys have probably already played BS3 in stereo here in the tournament. And that's actually something we've been working quite closely with NVIDIA with just now in the end of the project, once everything is sort of coming together, of doing really proper stereo rendering support. Because when you use deferred shading, again, and not the more traditional rendering pipelines, you have to do it in a more custom way. You have to render 2 complete different pictures for the eye, and not have it done automatically in the drivers with 3D Vision otherwise supports, because it doesn't work with our deferred shading. You instead have to have implemented ourselves in the engine. And we've done that now for Frostbite 2, that's in VF3, which is cool. And we actually render these 2 frames completely in parallel also. So if you have a better, quad-core or even more CPUs, it scales up very nicely there, which is very sweet. It works with all the post-processing rates and everything we talked about here. But as for rendering everything twice, it's really heavy. So you need a really good config, ideally 2 GPUs or something like that. And you can play it here. So that was, yeah, a little bit what I had to say. I have some summary here of some cool things. Personally, I think our game looks pretty sweet. I hope you guys agree. Yeah. Yeah. So really have tried to and combine the massive Battlefield gameplay experience with the visual style and the great visuals that we have, and make it for PC first and foremost. And this is just the start. All of this that we put it into our engine, the Frostbite 2 engine, and there's many games within EA and DICE going forward that will use the same engine. And I also think that you'll see quite a few other game developers sort of a little bit following our lead and release really competent PC versions going forward. So the future is bright.
Very cool. Well, thanks a lot, Johan.
Yeah, thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Really great. You guys appreciate that talk?